If you grab a map and have a look at Israel, how does it label the Gaza Strip and West Bank areas? It depends on where you are, really. If you're in China and you fire up their Google Maps equivalent Baidu, you'll notice that those areas are just blank. There's nothing there at all. No roads, no towns, no rivers, nothing. Very curious. Russia's Yandex Maps mysteriously doesn't have any country names at all, or indeed any international borders. I guess it shouldn't surprise me that the Russian government sees borders as purely theoretical. On an official US government map, they are called the Palestinian territories, whereas official Israeli maps kind of just mark them as blue or with stripy lines, a kind of Derby Dragons kind of a vibe. If you look at a Norwegian map, it will describe those areas as Palestine. On an Australian or British map, they are occupied Palestinian territories. It's something similar on Canadian and French maps too, but that might be changing soon.
Today I can confirm that at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September, Australia will recognise the state of Palestine.
Australia didn't go first, of course.
First France, then Britain, now Canada.
Canada intends to recognise the state of Palestine.
And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not happy about it.
The Palestinians are not about creating a state, they're about destroying a state.
The thing is, though, this is just the latest chapter in a very, very long story about how the rest of the world should treat the millions of Palestinian people who live in those two tiny pockets of land. In 1967, during the Six-Day War with its Arab neighbours, Israeli troops occupied Gaza and the West Bank. Millions of Palestinians fled into refugee camps in surrounding countries which were already packed with refugees from previous wars going back to the establishment of Israel. And in the 58 years since the Six-Day War, everyone has been trying to figure out how and when and if Israel should allow those pockets to become their own state as a
two-state solution.
The peaceful two-state solution.
I'm looking at two-state and one state, and I like the one that both parties like.
It's left the occupied Palestinian territories, or that stripy blue space, or Palestine, or whatever you call it, in a strange limbo. So what is going to happen next? We're going to spend the next 2 episodes looking at this because, well, it obviously really matters. It's a story of walks in Norwegian woods, sitting by a log fire, and an assassination of a prime minister. I also kind of just want to know if I need to get a new set of maps. I'm Matt Bevan, and this is If You're Listening. Before we get started, I just want to foreshadow that we are obviously not going to tell the entire story of the Arab-Israeli conflict in this episode. There are things that we cannot fit in, but our back catalogue has heaps of episodes covering other facets of this story. We've got like 5 episodes about Bibi Netanyahu's past. We've got episodes about Hamas, Hezbollah, Mossad and the Six-Day War. All of that is to say that before you accuse me of not reporting on something important, consider that it might be because I've already done a full episode on it. Anyway,
World War III.
2025 feels like a pretty eventful time to be alive, but it's worth noting that 1993 felt that way too.
But first it would appear right now that we're living in something akin to an age of miracles.
Here at the ABC, veteran journalist George Negus was at the centre of it all.
The Berlin Wall coming down, the Soviet Empire disintegrating, the freeing of Nelson Mandela, and the end of apartheid. And now in the last week, a development considered by many to be one of the greatest miracles of all.
An incredible breakthrough for peace in the Middle East had come seemingly out of nowhere.
Only days ago, they were considered mortal enemies. But today, Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat turned their backs on a century of hostility to struggle for peace.
Israelis and Palestinians were celebrating in the streets, and in Washington there was a historic handshake between Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and the Palestinian Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time for peace has come.
It's impossible to overstate how unexpected this news was.
At this moment at least, that miracle seems possible.
But to find out more about how this breakthrough happened, George Negus flew not to Israel, not even to Washington. He flew to the Norwegian capital, Oslo.
Out of the blue, the world discovered that the extraordinary peace deal struck by the Israelis and the PLO had been secretly brokered by the Norwegians, and in particular by a husband and wife team, Mona Juul, a 33-year-old career diplomat, and Terje Rød-Larsen, the head of a trade union research institute in Oslo.
Norway is hardly a big dog in the Middle East peace game. They're more of a toy poodle, nice to look at but not scaring anyone. But this Scandinavian couple had worked diligently as a team, making connections on both sides and doing the trusty good cop, bad cop routine.
As Abu Allah put it, the head of the Palestinian delegation, on many occasions when he was very angry with me, he was saying, "Terje, without Mona, you are nothing." I think that's very true.
When they set out to begin the process, the couple had differing views on how likely they were to succeed.
So did you really think that you would achieve what those negotiations did achieve?
No, at least not in the beginning. And I think I was probably all along less optimistic than Terje was.
So you're the pessimist, he's the optimist.
Yes.
It's actually true that I believed from the very start that we would be able to achieve something.
Terje thought that the planets had aligned in a way that made intervention by an obscure toy poodle like Norway the best option for finding common ground between Israelis and Palestinians.
I felt so strongly that this was the historical momentum and it would pass. You had to do it right then.
Previous peace negotiations had been massive spectacles.
The cast of this extraordinary world event continues to arrive.
All the big dogs were there, the American pit bulls and the Siberian huskies, all trying to peer pressure the Israelis and Palestinians into agreements.
So it became a sort of media-driven political circus and not serious negotiations.
Not to mention, the Israelis refused to speak to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or its leader Yasser Arafat, even though they were considered by most Palestinians to be their best representatives.
78% of those we questioned say Yasser Arafat, after 20 years, is still the leader who best represents their interests. 93% describe the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians.
To the Israelis, the PLO's history of terrorist activities disqualified them as peace partners.
I can tell you that if it's up to the PLO, there'll never be peace. They're not interested in peace.
At the time, Benjamin Netanyahu was Israel's deputy foreign minister, and he was adamant that the government would not negotiate at all with Arafat, saying the PLO wanted to destroy Israel entirely.
Their problem never was that the Palestinians lack a state, but that the Jews have one.
They were also kind of trying to solve all of the problems in one single agreement.
Central to the success of the peace talks, will Israel be prepared to trade land for peace?
We believe that territorial compromise is essential for peace.
By the end of the day, the Arabs and Israelis seemed as far apart as they'd always been.
Terje and Mona in Norway thought that big public summits prevented the sides from actually talking to each other.
It was so tempting for both parties to talk to their electorate, to the Arab street and to the Israeli electorate, and not to each other.
But they saw a brief window of opportunity that might make the Israelis and Palestinians more willing to negotiate. In 1992, a left-wing government had been elected in Israel, and its leader, the retired Army General Yitzhak Rabin, had expressed interest in restricting the construction of Israeli settlements in the territories occupied in that 1967 Six-Day War.
For the sake of peace with Arab neighbours, his party is now talking about giving back land he fought for and won. Labour has agreed to a one-year freeze on new settlements and a building restriction on others.
But Labour's push for peace wasn't all about humanitarianism. They knew that Yasser Arafat's PLO was basically at rock bottom. Exiled from their homeland since the 1967 war, they were forced to operate out of refugee camps and temporary headquarters in friendly countries. In the early 90s, various strategic errors had pushed them to the brink of bankruptcy. They were isolated, broke, and homesick, making them potentially more susceptible to Israel's signature brand of hardball negotiation. So it was these factors converging, a more progressive Israeli government, and a weakened PLO that led to, what did Terje call it again?
Historical momentum.
And it was how he and Mona were able to convince small delegations from the Israeli government and the PLO to secretly come meet with them in Oslo without the press, the public, or even the Americans knowing what they were up to.
What was, I think, evident from the very start was that there was a war of images going on, and that the Israelis had the completely false image of what the PLO was all about, and mutually that the PLO leadership had a completely wrong image of who the Israelis were.
In fact, some of the PLO delegates had never met an Israeli in their life. Mona and Terje were convinced that it was vital to get the two sides to socialise with each other in the most Norwegian way possible.
Arranging walks in the woods, sitting by a log fire, having a drink in the evening, chatting about their families, about life, about fate, about, all subjects that human beings are preoccupied with.
It took 9 months, but the two parties finally came to an agreement. Not a final agreement that would address every single problem, but an interim one. An agreement to begin a 5-year negotiation period where they would sort out all of the other issues. They knew they would need to sign the documents publicly in Washington, but to make sure nobody got cold feet, they did the diplomatic equivalent of running down to the registry to get married.
It was a secret ceremony when the Declaration of Principle were initialed, and that was very different from the ceremony outside the White House lawn.
There, with the negotiators, were Juul and Larsen, looking on, and all of this completely without the world's knowledge.
The Palestinian representative talked about how often he'd cried during the final steps of the process.
I cried this week twice. Really, we cried. We congratulated each other. And at that time we said, now we have to start the big battle for development, for construction, for cooperation.
The two parties signed the first part of what is now known as the Oslo Accords, an important document that set out the new relationship going forward between Israel and the Palestinian territories. So what did this document set out? Well, the two parties agreed to recognise each other. The PLO would recognise Israel's right to exist, and Israel would recognise the PLO as the rightful representatives of the Palestinian people. But the two sides clearly weren't evenly matched in terms of negotiating power. Academic studies have been published looking at how heavily the cards were stacked in Israel's favour. The Israelis were leaders of a first world nuclear-armed regional superpower, negotiating against a group of destitute exiles, unable to pay their electricity bill, and desperate for some kind of agreement that would allow them to return home while still retaining power. This led to some serious concessions by the PLO. For example, during the talks, the PLO said that they wanted any agreement to include a guarantee that construction of Israeli settlements would stop. But just to wind the tape back a little bit,
Labour has agreed to a 1-year freeze on new settlements and a building restriction on others.
But they've already stopped. The Israeli Labour government said there was no need to put that in the official agreement. So, there was nothing in the document about stopping settlement construction, and nothing in there about evacuating the settlers who were already living there, despite the fact that they were considered illegal by the international community.
This is where the first Jew lived, Abraham, and his children and their children. This is ours.
This was one of several issues that notably were not being addressed by the Oslo Agreement. There was also nothing on what would happen to the millions of Palestinians living in refugee camps in neighbouring countries, or who would control Jerusalem.
It is the holy place for the Jews, for the Christians, and for the Muslims.
But it was okay. Those things would come during the 5-year negotiation process. In the meantime, exciting things were happening.
By next April, soldiers will have gone from here and from the Palestinian cities of the Gaza Strip. During that time, the Palestinians will take over health, education and culture, local taxation and tourism. A Palestinian police force will be on the streets.
To achieve that, a Palestinian authority would be set up as an interim government, which would then negotiate with Israel to create a permanent Palestinian state and sort out all those other issues.
Palestinian negotiators see the move as a first tangible step towards their ultimate goal.
In the short term, the Palestinian Authority's autonomy would be extremely limited.
The economy is more or less out of their hands. The areas are too small. Their economies are, shattered anyway. They're not going to have any control over their own security. They're not going to have control over the sort of foreign affairs of their particular region. So all that's going to absolutely remain in Israeli hands.
They wouldn't have control over all the land occupied by Israel in 1967. But there appeared to be a plan to hand that power over to them in the future. As the Oslo process continued, maps were drawn to plan for that eventuality. They showed the Palestinian territories broken into 3 areas: Area A, B, and C. Area A gave the Palestinian Authority total administrative and security control over Palestinian cities, including their own police. Area B gave the authority partial administrative control over smaller villages and towns, though both Palestinian and Israeli police would roam the streets. And Area C remained under Israeli control, pending future negotiations. Area C takes up about 2/3 of the West Bank, and it's where all of the Israeli settlers live. You can see how it looked to the international community. Area A is under Palestinian control, and of course areas B and C will follow, like phases 1, 2, 3 of a highway project. Sure, we're starting small, but you can see where we're headed, right? The year after the secret signing in Oslo, Arafat and Prime Minister Rabin returned to Norway to receive the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts. But by this time, both Israelis and Palestinians saw the potential for problems down the road. Both sides wanted to control Area C, and one of them was going to be very disappointed.
Violence seems almost inevitable. Arabs and Jews, soldiers and settlers.
In the short term, it was all very exciting for the PLO.
It was Yasser Arafat's day of triumph. After 27 years, the refugee who's become the human symbol of the struggle for a Palestinian homeland returned to Gaza. For now, he may be reclaiming only a tiny part of Palestine, but Palestinians have a leader, and for the first time since Israeli occupation, he was there among them.
But for many Israelis, this was a nightmare.
And those not prepared to compromise have taken to the streets of Jerusalem.
Right-wing Israelis protested the visit and called for Arafat's death.
Fortunately, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was now the leader of the opposition, was extremely measured and not at all hyperbolic about the whole thing.
What we're seeing today is the beginning of the creation of the Palestinian state, which Arafat says in more private moments will merely be a stepping stone for the destruction of the Jewish state.
Yes, Bibi Netanyahu is back and spending his every waking minute criticising the agreements that were struck in Oslo.
I think it's the height of folly. It's the quest for peace at any price.
As the peace process continued, violence and political division increased.
It's always been assumed that Israel's greatest danger and the greatest threat to the peace process would come from outside this country. Now, for the first time, it seems Israel's internal divisions are just as dangerous.
The pressure within Israel was getting higher and higher. Opposition to Prime Minister Rabin's policies was getting stronger.
At this rally, Likud leader Benjamin Netanyahu was cheered on by crowds yelling, "Rabin is a traitor."
In response, Prime Minister Rabin held a peace rally in Jerusalem.
I've come here to support the peace agreement, to support the Israeli Prime Minister, to do peace with all the Arab countries.
I think the majority of the people in Israel are believe in the peace and they want the peace.
Massive crowds gathered to watch the musical pre-show. Prime Minister Rabin came out and sang with the musicians and gave a speech thanking the supporters of the peace process. It was all very wholesome. The rally wrapped up at about 9:30. Rabin stepped down from the podium and was ushered towards his waiting car. As he was climbing into the car,
2 bullets fired at close range struck Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin.
A 27-year-old Jewish extremist was apprehended immediately and confessed to the shooting as Rabin was rushed to hospital for emergency surgery.
Within an hour, the former general turned peacemaker was dead. A political assassination unprecedented in Israel.
Yitzhak Rabin was my partner and my friend.
I admired him, and I loved him very much.
Yasser Arafat was devastated too.
I'm very shocked for this awful and terrible crime against one of the brave leaders of Israel and the peacemakers.
Many here said their country would never be the same.
Far from it, actually. In fact, the country kind of became frozen in place. The following year, Bibi Netanyahu won a snap election, and one of his first moves was to make the theoretically interim agreements struck in Oslo that were only supposed to be in place for 5 years into permanent ones. This decision had massive consequences that remain decades later. The Palestinian Authority was meant to be temporary, but it's still there. They control Area A, they partially control Area B, and they have no control over Area C. The number of settlers in Area C has more than doubled. After all, there was nothing in the Oslo Accords that stopped construction of settlements. There's been no progress on formalising a Palestinian state, or figuring out control of Jerusalem, or what to do with the millions of Palestinian refugees. But now, clearly, many of Israel's allies have decided that they are not happy with treading water. Ever since the Oslo Accords, most Western countries have agreed that a two-state solution is the only way to achieve lasting peace in the region. But they've never been particularly proactive about trying to force that to happen. That is now changing. Several Western allies say they intend to recognise Palestine at the UN General Assembly. But what will that actually change? That's next on If You're Listening.